Welcome to this evening's lecture by Professor Annette Henderson. My name is Nikki Harray. I am head of the School of Psychology here at Waipapa, the University of Auckland. And it is my pleasure to introduce Annette to you tonight. So Annette, as I'm sure many of you, most of you know, is originally from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and earned her MA and MSc from the University of Calgary. She completed a PhD in Developmental Psychology at Queen's University in 2007 and went on to a postdoc at the University of Maryland. Her early research focused on children's word learning and cooperation. She was appointed here at Waipapa in 2009. Soon after arrival, she founded the Early Learning Lab, affectionately known as ELLA. As one colleague I approached in preparation for this introduction said, Annette set up from scratch an extremely impressive research program. Her research lab was very labour-intensive and required extensive networking in order to build up a participant pool. Another colleague commented that Annette had the courage to develop truly innovative projects that integrate areas, advance methods, and have the potential to shift the way core developmental processes are understood. This early investment of time and resources clearly paid off, as Annette has a series of very impressive accomplishments. Her recent work has explored the factors that influence cooperation and prosocial behaviours in early childhood, and part of that has involved collaborative work investigating responsiveness and coordination in parent-child interactions. She's published over 50 articles, including in the top journals in her field, such as Child Development, Developmental Psychology and Cognition. She has secured major grants, including Marsden's and a Rutherford Fellowship, with intriguing titles, such as Completing the Loop with Baby X, and I know we're going to see Baby X later on tonight, and my favourite, Born and Raised to Cooperate. I especially like that because it sounds like the collective version of Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. The ELLA Lab has been a training ground for large groups of undergraduate students, as well as supported numerous postdoctoral research students and postdocs. Annette has supervised 66 research students to completion. As one colleague commented, this involved a tremendous amount of time and energy. Annette has shared her hard work and resulting infrastructure in the ELLA Lab with other academics. Annette is now the director of our brand new School Centre for Developmental Science. She has numerous collaborations inside and outside New Zealand and has served as president of the Australasian Human Development Association. Annette has also made substantial contributions to teaching at all levels with extraordinary student evaluations. I won't give you the numbers. In 2011, she received a Dean's Award for Teaching Excellence. And Annette has also been, as all of us know, a wonderful school citizen and was chair of our Equity Committee last year. I want to finish with a quote from a newer colleague, Annette, who I asked to sort of contribute some ideas for this. And I think this really sums it up. Annette is one of the most supportive colleagues that I've been fortunate enough to work with. She went above and beyond in helping me to learn the ropes when I started my job. She provided guidance with regard to teaching, service and research, helping me navigate daunting new processes. Annette does so much to make our school a better place, and I feel lucky to have had her as a colleague, collaborator and friend. Annette, over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. No Canada oku matua. No Canada aho. I whānau mai aho ki Calgary. I tipu ake aho ki Calgary. Ke orewa tamaki mokoro aho e noho ona. Ko Annette Henderson, tōku ingoa, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. So greetings, everybody. Thank you, Nikki, for that lovely introduction. It's a little bit embarrassing, but it's lovely, so thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here and share this talk with you. Before I get off any further, I wanted to share this whakatoki with you. He aha te mea nui o te o, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. So this whakatoki, which speaks to the importance of relationships and connections, was actually born out of devastation. Somebody had to lose their whole entire family to recognize that those things that we strive for in our daily lives, like titles and material wealth, actually pale in comparison compared to the relationships that we have with everybody around us. And it actually just takes me looking around this room today and knowing who's here to support me in this today to recognize how much that is true. So thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I know some of you work here, and it's kind of expected for you to be here, but I really appreciate it. But I also know there's many of you who came from a far distance to be here. Hibiscus Coast, woohoo! And Australia, thank you, Kelsey. And my fantastic, wonderful sisters who came here from North America to support me in this. Thank you. I also know that there are people who are online who are unable to be here today. So my dad and his wife, Doreen, thank you for watching and tuning in. And also, I think a lot of my family from overseas will be tuning in, so that's fantastic. And maybe some people who just saw this online and randomly wanted to watch. So nice to meet you. And also, I want to acknowledge people who have passed in our lives, and primarily my mom, who passed away 13 years ago after a really hard, valiant effort battling cancer. So I know she'd be here if she could, but my sisters are here for her. So thank you very much. Okay, and Yannick and Jackson, my wonderful family. You guys will star in the show later, so I promise I haven't forgotten you. So thank you very much. So preparing for the inaugural has been very, very strange because it's not a lecture. I'm not teaching you all something. You all know an awful lot. I'm also not giving a research talk where I have to go into a lot of details. And the inaugurals that I've been to that have been particularly special to me have been ones that have had a little bit of a personal flavor. So hopefully I've struck the balance a little bit right. I have a hard time not focusing on details of methods, so I've tried to pare that back a little bit. But also I'm hoping to share a little bit about me and who I am, and I'm hoping that each of you will walk away from here tonight knowing a little bit more about the person who I am and the journey that got me here today. So to ease into the topic, I'd like to do a little thought exercise with you. So, thinking about the last couple of days, I'd like you to think to yourself, have you had a conversation with someone who you didn't know very well, but were able to effectively communicate your innermost thoughts? Have you worked together with somebody, maybe towards a shared goal, solved a problem that you wouldn't have been able to solve on your own? Have you helped someone in need, or have you comforted someone? Has someone helped you or comforted you? So I know many of you in this room, but not all of you incredibly well. But I can almost guarantee that every one of you said yes to most, if not those answers, those questions. Now, I know this not because I'm in psychology, so can clearly read everybody's minds. I know this because of decades of research on human beings demonstrate that humans are an inherently social species. Our everyday lives are comprised of behavior with other people, if not for other people. This connection with others is key not only to surviving in our societies, but also thriving, which is demonstrated by the fact that giving and connection to core other-oriented behaviors are fundamental to the health and well-being models in Aotearoa, as well as globally. Now, the fundamental role that these behaviors play in our everyday lives is further underscored by the fact that the development of these capacities emerges within the first few years of life. So this evening, I am thrilled to be able to share some of the research that I've completed as part of my career with my developmental team so far. And so when I've selected the research to talk about, what I've also tried to do is select different kinds of methods that we use as developmental researchers because I want you to learn something, but also that's one of the reasons why I love what I do. We have these questions that we want to answer. We have these things that don't talk, right? Babies don't talk very well. And we have to examine what they think and what they know. So I'm looking forward to sharing those methods with you as well. But again, in not as much detail as I might in a big research talk. But I hope you can see the passion in my work, and maybe you can get some passion as well for developmental science work. Now, before I go too much further, I'd like you to learn a little bit more about who I am. So who am I? Well, I'm a professor, an academic, and within that space, I'm a developmental scientist and director of the Early Learning Lab. Now, of course, these identities are why we're technically here today, right? But again, looking around this room, this is actually not why we're here today. We're here because of these other identities that form a foundational role in who I am and my journey so far. I'm a teacher, I'm a mentor, a colleague, a partner, a mother, a friend, an auntie, a sister, a daughter, and maybe a lot more, but that's about it for now. And all of these identities are who I am and have played a pivotal role in my journey today. So I guess the first question is, how did this person come to be here today, and what is it that I actually do? Because I know some of you still don't know the answer to that question and wonder why I'm so busy when students aren't in semester and I'm technically supposed to be on research and study leave. Maybe we'll be able to figure that out today. So we'll start a little bit at the beginning. So my last name is Henderson. That's on my dad's side of the family. My mom's maiden name is Stretch, so that's Scottish backgrounds. But my family came from Scotland to Canada a very long time ago, so long ago that when we would ask our grandparents where we're from, they'd be just, well, just over the hill over there. So really, I'm Canadian as my kind of background. So here's a picture of my dad with his parents and his sister. My dad was raised in Quebec. And my mom's family is from Nova Scotia, the Atlantic part of Canada. This is my mom with her parents at a Christmas dinner. My mom is from a family of farmers, and so I had a very large family, and they all can't fit on one slide. So that's a little bit of the family from there. So my parents grew up in their respective provinces and went to post-secondary education. My dad was the first Henderson to go to post-secondary education, where he graduated with his mechanical engineering degree from the University of New Brunswick. And my mom got her training in secretarial school at Fredericton Business College. My parents met after they graduated from school, dated for a bit, and then moved to Calgary to start a family. So I came into the picture a few years later. Anyone know what year I came in? It's on the slide, but the music at the start maybe was a bit of a clue. 1977, perfect year. The year Elvis died, which is a little bit sad, but nonetheless, great year for music. So here I am with my family. You might have heard me, you heard me right. I was born on Christmas Eve. Fantastic time to be born. My sisters just loved me right from the start. The best Christmas present they could have had. But they're here, so maybe they got over it, hopefully. But growing up in this household wasn't easy. My two sisters excelled at pretty much everything that they did. So it was really hard to live up to them. They even got to wear matching outfits all of the time, and I never got to wear their clothes. My eldest sister Nadine is 9 years older than me, and my middle sister Deanna is 5 years older than me. So for the longest time, I was a little bit of an alien to them. But again, I think we're moving past that now. This was our family dog, Sunshine, great name for a dog of mine. And a big part of my life, and I had to put this picture of here, was my role in a performing arts scholarship program. So we had to audition and we received free performing arts training. This will come in very important a little bit later in my story. And this picture here is Deanna walking me to school for the first day. I was super excited, so excited that I never left school. Right? So, you know, you did a good job walking me there. So this is the first foundations of my life. The second foundations wasn't all glitters and sparkles as much. So when I was 12 years old, my mom decided to leave the family because she wanted to explore her own career. That was a challenging time for all of us. My sisters were away at university, so coping with that in their own time, and Dad was stuck with an pre-adolescent girl. But we made it through. Dad encouraged me to stay focused on school because that's what he believed was the most important thing. And we stuck by each other, and I made it through adolescence. That's my graduation from high school. At that time, Deanna had moved back home to help support the family. I'm sharing this not because I like bringing up the past, and I actually don't really like talking about this stuff at all, but thinking about our history is really, really important, particularly for a developmental scientist, because these early experiences taught me at least 3 key things that have played a role in my successes to date. The first off, the importance of friendships and relationships. This couple here were my dad and mom's best friends, my Aunt Joelle and Uncle Don, we call them. And they provided incredible stability during a difficult time. They had me and my dad over for dinner every week during those challenging times. And when the time was right, they introduced my dad to his partner, Doreen, now wife, who has kept my dad happy for 30 years. And she's been a source of support for our family. The second one is perseverance. Everybody in my family works incredibly hard to achieve those goals, working through some challenging times. And that perseverance is so important in academia. We get rejected all of the time. We have so many struggles, but these kinds of things you have to trek on. You have to just say, you know what? It's worth it. We'll just keep fighting and going on. Third one, citizenship. So, my family is incredibly kind and caring and does an awful lot for other people. I guess, Nikki, you even highlighted that in my introduction. My dad is a superstar in that. He does so many things for other people, often at a cost for himself. Now, I know the saying is nice people finish last. I truly disagree with that statement. I'd rather be kind and caring and take a little bit longer to where I got to than if I would have had it the other way. So putting these 3 things together hopefully tells you a little bit more about who I am and kind of where I got to. I give this picture here because this was a reminder of the talking point, because this is me getting an award from that Young Canadians group that I was a part of. And the award was voted on by my peers, and it wasn't the best performer or the best dancer. It was a person who tried really hard, worked hard, and was kind to everybody along the way. So that is just an important part to me. I'm gonna have a glass of water, not that whole glass. Okay, so the other cool thing I like about inaugurals is figuring out why people chose the field and what they were doing. So did I always want to be a professor? So there's little Annette here, and if you asked me when I was younger what I wanted to be when I grew up, there would be a few different kinds of answers, but one would be a teacher. That makes sense, I kind of do that now. But the other one, which emerged around adolescence, maybe because of the tricky, challenging time, was a psychologist. But it wasn't just any psychologist. I actually wanted to be a psychologist on a soap opera. I wanted to be Dr. Marlena Evans. Because to me, it was perfect. You could do psychology during the day and help all those wonderful people. And then you could wear ball gowns. You could die a few times and try out your different decision-making processes. So for me, that was perfect. So when I would talk about this career plan with my dad, he always had the best answer. He would say, yeah, okay, sure, Annette. Why don't you finish university first and see where you go from there? It was perfect, parents, right? He never said no. He said, sure, just get your degree first. So I'm clearly not a psychologist on a soap opera, so what happened? Well, the secret is I fell in love with research. And I didn't fall in love with just any research, I fell in love with developmental science research. And that love was ignited during my undergraduate degree at the University of Calgary. And it was ignited during my 4th year, which is the honors year at the University of Calgary. And I'd like to say that it was my honors thesis that ignited that passion, but it wasn't necessarily the honors thesis. It was a course that I took from a professor, Dr. Suzanne Halla. And this course was on early cognitive development in children. And part of the course was learning about developmental science and research and how researchers design these different kinds of tasks to tap into what children think about the world. It was just amazing to think and hear about all this research. I did pretty well in the paper, and at the end of the course, Suzanne asked me if I would be her lab manager. I thought, well, I was taking a year off anyways. This is maybe better for my career than teaching dancing, which is what I was also doing. So I said yes. It was a fantastic decision. I learned how to set up a lab. We recruited participants right from the start, spent weekends at the mall talking to families. But I got to also go and participate in completing the research. So we were doing all these tasks with children across different ages and diversity backgrounds. And I would always just sit there and think, why is this child doing this? What are they thinking? And so I really did enjoy that. And of course, it was no-brainer then for me to apply to do my master's with Suzanne. So I applied to do my master's with Suzanne and got accepted, so that was great. Unfortunately, partway through my master's, Suzanne became unwell and wasn't able to continue in as my supervisor and in the field for a little while. She had to take a step back. Fortunately, Dr. Susan Graham stepped in. Susan Graham is a clinical psychologist who also is a basic researcher. So I was like, oh, I can go back to wanting to become Dr. Marlena Evans maybe, because I can learn about clinical psychology and still do research. Well, Susan taught me about word learning research, which you'll hear about in a little bit. So I completed my master's with Susan, and then it was time to apply for a PhD. So I got accepted into the clinical program at the University of Calgary, and then got accepted at Queen's University to do my general psychology degree with Mark Saba. Now, Mark Saba he was pretty much brand new, doing some really cool work, and I was like, I would really like to work with him, but he did not take clinical students. So I had to make a decision, and it was a really, really tough choice. So I am and ah, because I still want to be Dr. Marlena Evans. So I reached out to an academic at the University of Calgary who I deeply respected, Dr. Penny Pexman, who is a cognitive scientist, so we can start to see where this is going to go. So I was talking with Penny, and she's like, well, what have you liked about doing your master's? And I said, oh my goodness, I've just loved the research, and yet I've already told you all this. And she said, okay, well, why do you want to do clinical psychology? I want to help people. And she's like, okay, sure, that's very noble, that's great. But what makes you think that you cannot help people when you do a PhD and you're an academic? And I just sat there and I kind of stared at her. And she's like, what am I doing right now? And I'm like, helping me? And she like sat back and was like, mm-hmm. And then I left. And then I thought about it for a while and realized, yeah, I'm gonna go to Queen's and I'm gonna do my PhD and start my career as a developmental scientist. And I haven't looked back since. So there's my story about how I got to where I got to. So what is developmental psychology? There's a lot of psych people in here, so I can go kind of quickly through here, but developmental psychology is a subdiscipline of psychology, and our focus is to look at stability and change across the lifespan. So we want to see how people grow, how they change across the life, and we have 5 main goals here. Identify, describe, explain, predict, and enhance. So if you pick a certain capacity, you can plop it into X here and identify the goals of psychology. So what do babies know about theory of mind? How does theory of mind stay the same across development? What influenced the development of it? How does that impact other aspects of development? And how can we enhance development? Or if this is something that we necessarily don't want to enhance and is something that might be harmful, we might want to minimize. So developmental psychologists, actually we can't call ourselves developmental psychologists, particularly New Zealand, because that's a term for registered psychologists, which I'm not. Remember, I'm not Dr. Marlena Evans. We are developmental scientists, or developmental psychology researchers. So developmental scientist I am. I've been fortunate enough to be able to dabble in each of these goals throughout my career. And so today I'm going to talk to you about 2 of those key main areas, which is words and communication and cooperation, and then go back to some social interaction work at the end. So you're going to see these icons here as a bit of a snippet as to when I've kind of addressed these different kinds of goals in my research. Hopefully it doesn't get confusing and it's helpful for you. Let me know afterwards what you think. Okay. So words. I'm really interested in words because of the conventional nature of words. And what does that mean? Well, the power of words as effective communicative tools is because of conventionality. Their meanings are shared by other language users, particularly other people within a person's language community. So, because of conventionality, we can, once we identify someone hopefully speaks our language, we can be fairly confident we can use our words to communicate with them. It's why we can communicate with people we don't know almost as easily as we can people who we know quite well. And as adults, we kind of take this fundamental fact about language for granted. We adjust our language quite easily, right? When we go teach to students, we try to use words that the students might understand more clearly. But sometimes as adults, conventionality mishaps happen, as I experienced when I moved from Canada to New Zealand. Now, one would have thought communication would have been okay. Canada, mostly English speaking, New Zealand, largely English speaking, but still some things happened. I spent much of my first year or so here wondering why students kept asking me for rubbers and why my friends were telling me they were tramping all of the time. You don't tell your friends and colleagues that in particular. So yeah, there's a few confusions, and these kinds of examples are hilarious, and maybe you might notice them more. But for me, those are funny stories, but I'm interested in conventionality because I want to know what children understand about conventionality. We know kids learn words at an incredibly rapid rate. Infants as young as 14 months of age can learn a new word with one exposure if the conditions are right. What I was curious about is what infants understood about those words that they're learning. Do they understand any of these kind of fundamental facts about language? So to highlight why this might be important, let's imagine this little baby here, and they're playing with this object, and the caregiver says something like, "Oh, you have a ball." In any typical situation, the child would learn that that object is called a ball. So later on, when I later ask for a ball, the child will give me the ball. That's great, that's word learning. But an understanding of conventionality would allow the child to go one step further. They wouldn't have to be able to be taught what other people think that object is. They can just generalize the word ball to everyone else in their language world. And these are some of the research questions that I looked at in the early kind of parts of my career. So through this research, using paradigms appropriately for the age range, I demonstrated that infants as young as 9 months of age would not only learn new words in a quick context like that, they would generalize the word to other language users. And they didn't just generalize any information we taught them. It was only words that they would generalize. When I moved to New Zealand, we continued on with this work, and we looked at the extent to which infants expected words to be shared, but within linguistic communities. So infants were taught a word by an English user, for example, and we wanted to see if babies would generalize to an English user, but maybe not a French user. And by 12 months of age, they demonstrate that pattern, suggesting that babies understand quite a bit about the conventional nature of language early on in their lives. So when I moved to do my PhD, I wanted to continue to examine conventionality because I thought that conventionality is not just something cool, a fact about language, but that it might actually be useful for language learning. So to provide an example of how it might be useful for language learning, imagine a situation like this. A child and their caregiver are walking down the street and they see a photo of this animal here. The child might say something like, "What's this?" And the caregiver could say, "Oh, that's a squirrel." Or, "That's special to where we live, it's a squirrel." These are typical of what caregivers might say in a labeling context, and in these cases, the child would learn that that object is indeed a squirrel. Now consider if the caregiver said something like this, "I don't know, maybe it's a squirrel?" Or, "Ooh, that's special to a faraway country. We don't have them where we live, it's a squirrel." The question here is, would children learn in this case? If children are using conventionality to learn language, they should actually avoid learning the label in this case, because the caregiver is providing a signal that that word might not be shared by the linguistic community. In the first case, the person is claiming ignorance, right? They're saying, "I don't know, maybe it's a squirrel." We tend not to like learning incorrect things, right? In the second case, the caregiver is providing a signal of relevance. The caregiver is essentially saying, "You're not going to see this thing again, why bother learning what it's called?" Okay? So children should maybe, if conventionality is driving word learning, they shouldn't learn in those cases. Now, when I was studying my PhD, lots of people were doing research in that first row. They were looking at knowledge and ignorance and demonstrating that infants, even as young as 24 months of age, would avoid learning in the cases when somebody has claimed ignorance or uncertainty when providing a label. Now, that might be just because people don't like learning incorrect things, which I already alluded to. I wanted to test conventionality further. So I wanted to see if they paid attention to relevance. Because in relevance cases, the label is correct, right? It's correct somewhere, just not maybe to New Zealand. We don't have squirrels here. So I designed a study in which we manipulated this with children. So what you do in these kinds of studies is you show children new toys they've never seen before and don't have a name for, and then you tell them about the object. So in this study, we told them either these toys are from a store nearby or special from kids who live around here, or these toys are from a store really far away and special to kids who live over there. So that not relevant case. We then teach them a label for the object, so somebody would come in and provide a name for one of those objects. And then we put the pictures up on the screen and we see if the child will point to the object when we say, show me the Uzma, for example. All right, so when we did this study with children, this was for children 4 years of age at this point in time, we found that children did not show learning in the irrelevant condition. So just telling kids that the objects are from a different faraway place hindered their word learning. This was really cool, so cool that when I told my supervisor, he's like, oh my goodness, I thought that was not gonna come out. He's like, you know what you need to do? Replicate. So we replicated in that lab, and then I even had to replicate it again in another lab. So after 3 studies, we demonstrate that indeed relevant information drives children's word learning. The next question is this information even important to their everyday lives? Do parents talk about conventionality? So we had parents and children come into the lab and play with different kinds of objects. The relevant, the most important comparison here is the box in yellow, which are objects that neither the parent nor the children knew the names of. And in one case, they're manufactured objects, so clearly had a name. In the other one, they were toys that I made because everyone in developmental psychology also does crafts. And we wanted to see if parents talked about them differently. And this is just an example of transcripts from that study. Parents definitely highlight their uncertainty and ignorance. They're like, this is really strange, essentially saying you're never going to see this thing before. And also gave that information to children. So together these studies demonstrate that infants are ready to communicate early in their lives. They expect word meanings to be shared across people. Preschoolers seem to use conventionality to drive their word learning, and interactions with parents carry information relevant to conventionality. So that work was largely part of my PhD work, and it was awesome. I really enjoyed doing it. It was super excellent research, obviously cool. So happy to graduate and receive my PhD from Queen's. So good decision to go to Queen's. So it turns out the decision to go to Queen's was even better for another reason. It was there when I met a certain handsome, clever, fiber optical engineer who was also doing his PhD. Along the way. And so that, of course, is Yannick, who is now my partner, well, has been for a while. Awkward. And has been fantastic and an important source of support along the way. You can't even use words in these kind of situations to communicate this. But also during that time, the lab group. So my lab up there, the people around you, they're the people who are going to also be that amazing support and sense of stress relief when you're having that hard time through your PhD, because it's not all jazz hands all the time. And I had a running group where we did a lot of running for stress relief, so we could also eat a lot during the graduate school, and it kept me sane as well. So the PhD time was truly a special time. But it comes to an end, and then you're left thinking, what am I going to do next? Because you've worked so hard for so long for this piece of paper, and now it's like, okay, I would like a job, but you still can't get a job, so now what? So I was thinking, what do I want to look at? Well, as a developmental scientist, I'd been studying older children, says the infant researcher, and I really wanted to understand younger children. So I was like, I need to know how we study infants. And I also started thinking about, well, I've been looking at words, what other kinds of behaviors are shared across people? And then I thought, well, cooperation. We cooperate with other people all the time, and those activities are ones in which we're working together and coordinating our actions towards a shared goal. So what I did is I put in a grant proposal for a postdoc fellowship in which I wanted to go work with Amanda Woodward, who is very well established in terms of her work in infant cognition, and to look at the development of infants' understanding of the shared nature of cooperation. Fortunately, that application went through, and I was able to go work with Amanda. So we had to develop a new paradigm because nobody had looked at infants' understanding of cooperation. Now, if you're an infant researcher, you understand this, but if you haven't done a lot of research with infants, infants can't talk to you. They don't point to objects when you ask them to point to objects incredibly reliably. So as a developmental scientist research, we use infants' eye gaze to tell us what they're thinking about the world. So we developed this cooperation visual habituation paradigm. So what this means is we showed babies this video action sequence of two people working together to get a toy out of a container. We showed them this event over and over and over again until they essentially get bored. So they're really attentive at the beginning, and then their attention starts declining. When their attention declines enough, that suggests that they've figured out something about that event. Okay? All right. So what we wanted to know is what they were thinking about the event. As adults looking at this, we would say, well, the woman in the blue shirt, the box opener, is holding the box open for her friend who got the toy out so that they could get the toy block. That is a cooperation event. But that event could also be interpreted in another way. It could be that the blue shirt girl wanted the box and opened the box, and the other girl wanted the toy. So how we test what babies think about this event is we show them two different test events that are closely matched. They're closely matched in that they have the same two objects they've seen before, and the only difference is in one test case they reach towards the box, in the other one they reach towards the toy. Now this is the person who'd been reaching towards the box the whole entire time. We wanted to see if babies think that she should keep reaching towards the box or if she should go to the toy, which if they think about it as cooperation, that's what they should think about, right? She wanted the toy all along, it's there, she should go get it. So babies should find it unexpected, and in developmental science, this means they look longer when she reaches towards the box. Okay? Okay, good. Now the joys of these paradigms is not just one condition. So I'm going to show you a graph with just the cooperation condition and the two test trials. We have many control conditions that I don't have time to talk about. If you ever want to chat about them over coffee, read the paper first, because I don't want to have an argument with you. And then we can talk about it. But what you can see here is we did this with 3 different age groups, and the only age group where there's a reliable difference between those 2 bars is at 14 months of age. 14 months of old looked longer when she reached towards the box, which means that they were like, why is she going towards the box? Because the toy's over there. And so they interpret that cooperation event as a cooperation towards a shared goal. Good. Okay, that's enough methods for now. We followed up with that with the attention visual prediction paradigm. So instead of looking at infants' overall looking time, we then look to see where they think she should reach. So in these test events, what she does is she starts moving, and then the question is where will babies look? And they, like what adults would do, we would look to where we think the person should be reaching. So we see if babies look towards the toy block. And in this paradigm, when you compare it with a non-cooperation case, again, babies expected her to reach towards that toy, suggesting that babies have at least a basic appreciation of the shared goal nature of cooperation. They can hang those actions of 2 different people together as working towards the same thing. So that took up a lot of the time during my postdoc because baby work is really hard. But of course, during that time, I also had a fantastic time with my lab mates. And yes, I got Amanda Woodward to do jazz hands. That's fantastic. That's her. Oops. Oh, that's not her. Anyway, she's up there now. Now that time was fantastic. I was doing some really cool research. It was also fantastic because I was living in Maryland. And Maryland was only a few hours away from my big eldest sister, Nadine, who I hadn't spent a lot of time with up until that point. So I got to drive over to visit her and her family for quite a few times during that time. So it was really special to get to know you as an adult, and maybe you're still not mad at me for being born at Christmas because of that. So it was a fantastic time. But it was also sad because it was me and my cat Chinook, and the rest of my heart was still in Canada. So our other cat Pico and Yannick was working in Canada. We got married during the time, which was fantastic, but after 2 years of the postdoc, that living apart needed to end. So the job market. So applied to lots of different kinds of jobs, and one of the offers that came in was to move to Waipapatomatoro, University of Auckland. So it was a tough decision because it's really far far from many other places that I was familiar with, but the head of school at the time, Professor Emeritus Fred Seymour, drove a really hard bargain. I would be sitting there and I'd ask him questions about New Zealand, and he would write back with emails like this: I'm just about to go on the ferry for a boat ride and go on an ocean swim. Meanwhile, I'm in the middle of a North American winter. So New Zealand was looking pretty good. So Yannick and I came to visit. Yannick also got a job offer in Auckland, so it all looked pretty good. So we packed up our life, went across the ocean, and started our life in New Zealand here to work in the Department of Psychology, then School of Psychology now. So we had to build a new home. And building a new home is fantastic, but trying to do it as an early career academic is pretty intense, right? We have all of our new teaching. That's tricky. All these new service roles and acronyms. Man, New Zealand, you guys love these acronyms, right? But also, I had to develop a new lab. I didn't have anywhere where I could do all this amazing research that I was supposedly hired to do. So I've dug out this recently and was showing my lab of me drawing my lab. My dad would be so proud of my engineering skills, and work to develop the lab. During this time, I had many, many endless hours with Margaret. I know you're here. Margaret, thank you for all of your effort, especially earlier on in those years, and Peter Johnson. And also my handy-dandy live-in engineer husband, who we spent many weekends in the lab setting up things and plugging in things to make sure it still worked. So we got the lab going, but also during that time, we were meeting incredible new friends. I started here at a time where, I don't know, the vibe in the school was fantastic. The colleagues that had been here for a long time were fantastic, inviting us for lots of dinners, sharing with us about New Zealand. I also arrived at a time where more junior people had already started. So I had built-in friends immediately. Everyone on my floor, Nicola, I don't know why your name isn't on this sign as one of the offices, but nonetheless, Nicola was on the floor. I was beside Quentin and Chris, and I'd run and talk to them, and run and talk to everybody. It was fantastic. I knew we had made the right decision from that time. It was good when Yannick and I had happy hours with more than just the two of us, because it was an N of 2 for many of the first happy hours. But we got there. 9 months later, I had a baby. No, I'm just kidding. The lab started. The Ella Lab ran their first session about 9 months after we started construction, which was fantastic. I had my first students, my first research volunteers. It was just a really incredible moment. So part of doing developmental research is you kind of need to replicate these things that you did before. So our first step was to replicate those early studies that I did in my postdoc. So we ran that conventionality language study, which was fantastic and worked out. We also engage in a lot of communication with the public. We need to tell people what we're doing so that the public is excited about our research and comes back and participates. So we do some newsletters to share with the people, Ella Update. So my team does a lot of these newsletters and spends a lot of time on them. So thank you. The lab seemed to multiply. So the next year it doubled, and the following year it didn't quite double, but we were getting lots of people, and it was intense. But we were doing lots of cool work. Here we were picking up on the cooperation work. We had previously shown that 9-month-olds didn't understand cooperation. So Ying, right there, is here, thank you. Ying conducted a study where she did active experience with the 9-month-olds. So 9-month-olds participated with the experimenter and cooperated, and that participation changed how the 9-month-olds viewed that event, suggesting that active experience is really important in shaping learning in infants. Ying continued to build on this work in her PhD, in which now we knew that babies kind of seemed to appreciate some aspects of cooperation. We started to play around with it a little bit. Ying wanted to know, what do babies think about the consequences of cooperation? So as adults, when we work together with someone to make dinner, we expect to eat that dinner together, right? And we expect to share that dinner, right, Jackson? Share equally. And we also expect that if someone doesn't do as much work, maybe they don't get dessert or they don't get as much stuff. Okay, not always the case, but nonetheless, Ying developed some paradigms to test these questions, and we demonstrated that babies did seem to appreciate at least some of these basic concepts of cooperation. So things were really cool at this point. We were doing lots of work on infants' understanding of cooperation in these looking time paradigms. At the same time, people were doing all these behavioral studies looking at how kids cooperate. But we were all doing things in different parts of the world and not communicating. We had no idea if these early looking time studies mapped onto what they actually do in the real world. We also didn't know if this over time started to show, like these babies who show these initial understandings, are they good cooperators? And there's also evidence with adults that cooperation makes us happy and healthy people. We had no idea if these things happened with kids. So while thinking about all this, I was like, we really need to solve this problem. So we should do a study. So the ORCA study was born. So it's a longitudinal study in which we looked at the development of cooperation from infancy through to about 8 years of age. That study took a little while to get funded. I did have a few margins that didn't quite go through, but fortunately at some point in time it did, so we were able to start the study. That study started as 5 data collection waves with over 200 families coming into the lab, and I was able to build on that when I was fortunate enough to receive the Rutherford Fellowship as well. So this is a really big study with many different measures. I'm not going to talk about them all, but I'm going to highlight some of the findings from 2 key PhD students who ran this work. And I'd also highlight that Chloe Moore, who is in the house, helped run most of those studies as well. So thank you, Chloe, for being here today to share this with me. So Nicole was a PhD student who looked at the cooperation stuff. And there's a lot of words on here. I'll let you read the words. I'm not going to say them all. But basically, we showed that the looking time stuff is different from the behavioral stuff, and the behavioral stuff is different from motivation stuff. So all of these things are very diverse constructs, and we're not quite sure what to make of that quite yet. But it's important to do these things all in one study, because if we didn't, we'd think that these things are all related, and maybe it seems to be that there's different capacities that feed into it. Parents play a role in shaping children's cooperative behavior, and infants' peer cooperation is influenced by warm-up interactions. So this makes sense, right? When we meet someone new, if we don't get along with that person, we're like, we're not going to cooperate well with that person. But nobody had really looked at that with kids. And most importantly, they have kids come in and do these studies, and they meet each other, and nobody looks at what happens when they meet each other. So we kind of actually surprisingly came across this finding to showed that children who have somewhat awkward initial interaction tend to be less able to cooperate as well with that peer. Nicole, Sina Gebhardt came into the picture, and she was interested in looking at the prosocial behavior side, so we had extended the cooperation study to other prosocial behaviors. And she also found that helping, sharing, and comforting are also incredibly diverse constructs. And not only are they different from one another, which some other people had already shown, you can't even average tasks within helping. So a child who helped in one context wouldn't necessarily help in another context. So researchers were adding these things all together and averaging, but for us, we weren't able to do that. So again, raises lots of questions, but makes sense. We can't get people to help all the time, and some people, maybe in our school and university, they might help sometimes, but not other times, right? So we need to kind of figure out these individual differences to try to kind of get more help in all these cases. Sina also showed that prosocial behavior is tied with happiness. Children who helped more quickly were more happy, and watching other people engage in prosocial behavior made children happier and have more positive emotions. So all these things are coming together, showing that cooperation and communication are happening early in life. The next another important question is, where are these things all coming from? Some of you might be thinking to yourself, 9-month-olds, man, they know an awful lot. That's amazing. Well, infants are engaging in coordinated interactions with the people in the world from the moment they're born. They might not be grabbing objects and cooperating by taking toys out of boxes, but they're engaging in coordinated cooperation loops. For me to illustrate this to you, I pulled one of my favorite ones from my personal video collection. So cute, eh? So if you're ever depressed or having a bad day, just play this and it makes you happy. When I'm mad at Jackson, maybe I just play this and I remember, oh, look how cute he is. Never happens, never. Anyway, so what you saw is this is a coordinated interaction loop. One of the partners does something, the other one responds, and it cycles around to a wonderfully beautiful cooperative interaction. These cooperative interactions are driven primarily by responsiveness. Responsiveness of the caregiver to the infant and the infant to the caregiver. So responsiveness is a key variable to capture these early coordinated loops. So interestingly enough, I was pulling stuff together this year. I realized I do a lot of responsiveness stuff in the different kinds of studies that we do. So it took a long time for me to figure out how I was going to get there, but here we go. This is how I got here. So if we think of responsiveness as a key variable that influences interactive loops, we can think of it as a parenting behavior in this case, if we're just talking about the parenting responsiveness. So Maria Corkin was a PhD student of mine and Liz's, and she didn't look at responsiveness necessarily in her main part of the thesis, but used this model for her work, and I wanted to pull it from her thesis, because it helps me think about why we want to look at responsiveness and why do we want to think of the different factors that influence responsiveness. And this is because, like I said, responsiveness is a key part of those interactive loops, and we see variability in responsiveness across caregiver dyads and relationships. And that variability is shaped to different outcomes. So identifying the factors that influence responsiveness is really important for identifying ways of enhancing relationships and interactions. So I've been a part of a few studies that have looked at this, but I'm going to highlight one tonight. And this is a study that wasn't designed necessarily to look at responsiveness, but does so in a way by looking at factors that influence responsiveness, namely parents' health and well-being, a stressful situation, and the marital relationship. And this study comes from our wonderful resilience and well-being study, which is led by Nicola Overall and her REACH team, and I am come into the child development arm of this study. And this study was designed to look at parents' conflict engagement and recovery from conflict and how that influences the family and child and health and well-being over time. One key indicator of high-quality parenting in our study is caregiver responsiveness. Now, this study received funding in 2018. It was a longitudinal study that was supposed to go for 3 years. 8 plus 3 goes to 2021. What happened during that time? Awesomeness, really, was what it was, right? We had this incredibly stressful situation. COVID was stressful for everybody. It was really stressful for families with young children. So while we were doing the study, Nicola and the REACH team had this fantastic idea that we should do more research and reach out to our families to see how they're doing during the lockdowns. It was fantastic because we had all of this data before the pandemic, so we could look to see how change happened. So what I want to do for today's talk is just pull on one key finding that we found out in that study about caregiver responsiveness. So what we found out in that study is parents who were stressed reported lower levels of caregiver responsiveness, so their stress reduced the extent to which they could be responsive to their child. And this was particularly the case in this COVID-19 lockdown, where even controlling for their initial stress levels, those increased stress from the pandemic also was associated with reductions in caregiver responsiveness. But the story wasn't all sad for us, because we found something that actually helped buffer or reduce the negative impact of that stress on caregiver responsiveness. And this was the cooperative co-parenting. So the extent to which parents reported having the other parent who was cooperative with them in it and helping them help raise their child, they did not report those reductions, or they were less likely to report those reductions in caregiver responsiveness. So this study provides some really neat new data to show that stress, particularly in a particularly stressful time, is associated with reduced responsiveness, but that cooperative co-parenting and aspects of that marital relationship can help it out. So identifying what factors shape responsiveness, like I said, is important, because then we can start to figure out why responsiveness might increase or decrease and hopefully support optimal outcomes in children. This could work if we could actually design studies where we had a caregiver being responsive and manipulating aspects of the child to see how those changes in children's behavior influences caregiver responsiveness. Now, we can't do that. We can't tell children, hey child, stop responding to your caregiver. Now they don't listen to us often, but we can't do that in an experimental paradigm. We can do the reverse. So we know from lots of other research that researchers have asked caregivers to stop responding to their child, and you can see what babies do. They don't like it very much. They get very frustrated. So we know one part of the loop, but we don't know the second part of the loop. We don't know what caregivers are particularly sensitive to. Until now. So my team, in collaboration with Mark Sagar, who has affiliations with the Auckland Bioengineering Institute and Soul Machines, a company, have been working to develop Baby X. Baby X is a novel interactive experimental tool to test that we would like to use or are using to test how infants shape caregivers' interactive responsiveness. This study has been going on for a long time. This is one of my second most enduring collaborations. I met Mark over 10 years ago over dinner when a speaker was here, Alison Gopnik, very cool speaker, very cool dinner. And Mark said, hey, you do research with babies. And I said, yes. He goes, check this out. And he showed me his digital baby. And it was amazing. It was super realistic even then. And I said, okay, what are you doing with this? He's like, well, I'm going to make it act like a real baby. And I said, okay. So do you have data? And he said, no. I said, well, do you want some? So that dinner, this is why dinners and social interactions can be really important to our lives, fueled this decade-long collaboration. So we've done a ton of different kinds of studies looking at caregivers interacting with their own baby, caregivers interacting with another baby, caregivers interacting with their own baby through a digital device, all in the name of creating a library and understanding all the different ways that caregivers and infants interact to help us inform the development of Baby X. We've finally gotten to the point that we are conducting our first study with Baby X. And this is Florian, who's our research manager for the study and doing a spectacular job. I don't know where you went. Oh, there you are. Woohoo! Thank you, Florian. I'm still working with Mark, and we've added to our cooperative team. And this was fundamental, adding in these new collaborators, because just talking to them and the kinds of information we can develop for our study with these collaborators. And we have some students in the house who are working on the project too. So I'm not going to explain Baby X to you. I'm just going to show you Baby X.
What's this?
I think that's a gap for another one of the insects. Do you think it could be this one?
Bugs.
Bugs. Bugs.
Bugs.
Bugs. Yeah. Oh, you're going away. Hello.
Peekaboo.
Peekaboo.
Where did you go?
Where did I go?
I can't see you.
You can't see me.
Peekaboo.
Peekaboo.
We are not controlling Baby X.
What is
Baby
it?
X is
A pig
responding
is a farm
in
animal.
a socially contingent
Where
way.
pig
Here,
is a what?
it's a farm animal.
Animal?
Yeah,
Pig is an animal?
it is.
Are you okay? Do you need to suck on your thumb? Are you sure you need to do that?
Suck thumb. Need suck.
How come you need suck? Do you feel nervous?
Me feel happy.
Oh, good. That's very good.
Woof woof.
Woof woof. Good job. Woof woof. There he is. Who should I put next to the dog?
Doggy Douglas.
Doggy Douglas.
Woof woof.
Is that the dog's name? Douglas.
Doggy Douglas.
I like it.
Woof woof.
What about the cow? What's the cow's name?
Cow. Moo moo.
Moo Moo.
Okay, so you can actually watch Baby X videos forever. It's quite entertaining. What we're using is Baby X, who is what we argue is our plausible simulation of a baby, to test the effect of changes in infant behavior on caregiver behavior. So we're able to complete the loop in this research, or at least make a first step to hopefully completing this loop in understanding how babies and children shape caregiver responsiveness. And I had to do a shameless plug because we really need dads. So in this kind of literature with parents, there's so much parent data on moms. We know what moms are doing all the time with their children, but we can't get dads in there as much. So if you do know any dads who have a 1-year-old child, please tell them about this neat study. So in the research so far, I've showed you how I've achieved the 5 goals of developmental psychology by looking at words and communication, cooperation, and social interactions. I'm so happy to be here, but there's still so much more work to do. We have big studies, stuff with our raw studies to still follow up and look at. The ORCA study has a ton of stuff to actually understand how these outcomes happen across time. We'd like to use Baby X to hopefully enhance caregiver responsiveness, and not just parent responsiveness, but caregivers of maybe children who are working at an early child care center, maybe to encourage them to kind of be more sensitive to aspects of infant behavior. We're also looking to collaborate with a German university, the KIND research group, who is studying the development of kindness in children and have an intervention to enhance kindness and caring in preschool and primary school age kids. Baby X is not just a tool for this particular study. There's a ton of stuff we could look at in developmental science. And I'd really like to get the Ella Lab moving and get the research, not just in the Ella Lab, but in developmental science, out into the community more. So we're making some directions in that. Sam recently tested at MOTAT, which is fantastic. We'd like to make connections across and get our research out to other people in the field, because we still have some limited understanding of the families and the children of Aotearoa. So there's lots of other research highlights that I didn't get into. I went to Vanuatu to do some research on cooperation. Quentin kindly allowed me to come along with one of his research trips. Russell and I and Quentin and the team went to Vanuatu to talk about language with the communities. Karen and Liz, early on in my time at the University of Auckland, invited me as an advisor in the Growing Up in New Zealand study. I'm really grateful for that. It was fantastic to just be there in those early years, and it's been great working with you and continuing to work with you. I'm part of an international collaboration replication effort, working with Yime, who's a current PhD student, and working with a community organization and collaborating first with Kelsey Dean on school gardening and kids, and now with Emma Sharp, and being able to look to see how gardening and cooperation out in the dirt, right, with kids helps shape their health and well-being. I love this job because of science communication. So you can tell I like to talk, sorry, but part of the joys is actually talking to the media, not just talking about my research, talking about other people's research, helping the public understand what it is we do and what this can tell us about development. And I am looking forward to the future of being the inaugural director of the new Center for Developmental Science. So has it all been jazz hands? I show a lot of jazz hands and I seem really happy and passionate, which I am, but there are challenges, there always are. We moved labs in the middle of a longitudinal study. That move in the lab was interesting per se, but Chloe was there and helped me through it, which was fantastic, and did the rest of the lab along the way. Life is a balancing act, so it was really easy to, well, not easy, but I was an academic for a while, and then I became a parent, which became a particularly incredible, interesting time in my life to try to juggle everything. Then on top of that, we had a pandemic, which added things even more. But as a developmental science, challenges breeds resilience and strength and happiness, maybe. Anyways, resilience nonetheless. So life was pretty challenging. There were times that I've experienced losses from afar, couldn't get there in time. But through that, my relationships have become stronger with the people here in New Zealand and my family. So thank you to the colleagues who have supported me through those tricky times. Being a parent, Yannick, it's been fantastic to raise Jackson with you. Jackson, you are wonderful. You are fantastic, and you are clever and amazing. And I know you get a little bit sad that you're sharing me with everybody. He is very jealous of my students, for those of you who are not in there. But I love you, and you are you, and I am me, and we're together, and it's fine, okay? The lockdowns, they were stressful, but they were also a lot of fun. We had to parent. Yannick and I both have stressful jobs, so we just divided and conquered. I loved seeing Yannick and Jackson dress up when they were drawing. That was neat, but it was truly some special family time. My lab is fantastic. Every year I've got a fantastic lab, so I just pick random years and pictures to show just how amazing they are. But COVID was amazing. We pulled together to keep doing good research, doing research in tricky times, but we still kept it going, and it was because of the team working together. And I also want to highlight the raw study again. That was very tricky to do, the COVID lockdowns. I was doing all that stuff and not really being able to contribute as much as the rest of the raw team. So that team produced some really important data for the COVID lockdowns, and I'm incredibly grateful, Nicola, for leading that team, and yeah, amazing stuff. So here I am, almost there, I promise. Ehara taku toa I te toa takitahi. Engari ke toa takitini. So I am standing up here giving this talk. But as you can see, my success is not just mine alone. It's a huge amount of team and people throughout the years who have played an important role in this. And I started writing a list of literally all the professional staff and the technical staff and everybody who has helped me along the way. And it would look really bad on the slide, but please know, I mean, you're here today and I'm incredibly grateful. The professional staff, the technical teams, the research support teams. My LL lab is a beast. There's a ton of technology and I always require help, and I'm just incredibly grateful for all the support that I've experienced from this university over the years. This is a big tech slide. Here are all my collaborators. Hopefully I've remembered everybody. Recent students, the bolded ones are students who are currently working with me or I'm currently actively collaborating with them. And above this, I also have undergraduate volunteers take part in the lab. They learn how to do some of our research, and from that they get hands-on experience with research, and they also ask us for reference letters along the way. And many of those people have been your students and have become successful academics too. I know Joan's in here somewhere, and there's many other ones as well. Nina, you were also. And I also want to highlight Christina Woolsey, who's been love you. She's been a research assistant in my team for a very long time and has been incredible for everything. So thank you, Christina, for all your support for all of the developmental people in the team. Thank you. And to my current students, you guys are fantastic. I've been a little crazy this year, but you're holding it together and I really appreciate you. Of course, the funders. I've put the successes I've had with funding. Behind this is a whole ton of not successes, okay? So I'm incredibly grateful for the people who have funded this research because I can't do it without funding. It's expensive, it's resource intensive. We have to code a ton of data, and that's watching a lot of videos of these family interactions. So thank you to all the funders and for people who have written those grants with me and helped me with those grants. And finally, to the thousands of parents, infants, and children who have volunteered their time for our research. Thank you to them for being a part of the team. So I started out with a whakatauki that talks about the importance of people in our lives. I hope that you've seen that the people in my life have been so important, and the research is awesome, and being a professor is amazing, but it wouldn't be so fun if I was doing it all by myself, and actually it would have been impossible. So I want to end my presentation with this whakatauki, because as I move forward, kia whakatomuri te haere whakamua. I'm going to keep thinking about the things that I've experienced and the people who I've known so I can move forward. And thank you to you all for joining me here today. Tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa.